want to thank you all and welcome you to the 40th annual Harney County Migratory Bird Festival gone virtual. This presentation is the History and Archaeology of Harney County with Scott Thomas. So our festival is made possible every year through the support and enthusiasm of our community partners. That is everyone from nonprofits to federal agencies to local businesses and community members. We're really fortunate to have such a committed community to making this happen year after year. I'm Janelle Wicks. I'm the Executive Director of the Friends of Malheur National Wildlife Refuge. I serve on the committee that plans the festival, and I'm really excited to be with you guys all today and throughout the weekend. So welcome. What you can expect from this presentation is about 40 minutes of presentation from Scott, then a little bit of time of question and answer. We're going to ask that everyone remain muted throughout, and please find that chat box. Feel free to type your questions and comments in there, and I will moderate them throughout the hour. And we'll save questions for Scott at the end, and I'll share them with him. So I'm going to ask too that you stay through the end of the Q&A, because I do want to share what's happening through the rest of the weekend with the lineup for the Bird Festival. So here we are for the History and Archaeology of Harney County, Part 1. We're going to have Scott back again tomorrow at 11 o'clock, so don't miss that. Scott Thomas earned his Bachelor's of Science in Zoology from OSU in 1975 and a Master's of Arts in Anthropology from Portland State in 1982. He worked for 24 years with the Burns Bureau of Land Management and retired in 2018. His research interests are varied and include the Clovis Age sites, buffalo hunting circa 1500 AD, edible plant harvest, 1700-year-old Rimrock Draw, the Rimrock Shelter, which is pictured here, and the prehistoric pottery, all in Harney County, along with some public archaeology. In his spare time, you might find Scott gardening, surf fishing, or fashioning a willow basket. Today, Scott is going to be presenting on edible spring wild plants of the Harney Basin and a World War II B24 crash in the Pueblo Mountains. Please remain muted through the duration of the presentation and write your comments and questions in the chat box. There will be a short question and answer session at the end of the hour. And without further ado, Scott Thomas.
Thanks a lot, Janelle. Now I'm going to have to change screens here, so I'll need a second. Thanks to Tara Thistle for fine technical support. This is really an archaeological discussion about the B24 because it's really late historic discussion because it happened in 1945. And so this is archaeology because some archaeologists did visit the site where this plane crashed. Their primary reason to be there was to determine if there were any human remains left and to secure them, that and personal effects, and then have them reburied elsewhere later. This all came to my purview in 1997 when some men were out poking around in the B24 crash site. It's located, it's a long ways from anywhere. You have to almost go to Nevada to get there. Well, actually, you do have to go to Nevada to get there. But at any rate, these guys were out poking around and they found human remains, and they went to the sheriff's office and turned them in. And that got a big ball rolling. I got some experience that I never could imagine getting as an archaeologist, because once that became known, the U.S. Army, which Air Force was part of the Army in 1945, sent a team of people from a place called Silhai, which is Central Identification Laboratory, Hawaii, sent them over here to go through the site and excavate any human remains that were left. And at any rate, so I got to meet people that I'd seen on the Discovery Channel that had done this in North Korea, Burma, South Pacific, Europe, and they're all, on their sole goal is to recover human remains of soldiers that have died in foreign countries. And they're very busy. And this is one of the few times they came to the United States. My first slide is a slide from the Burns Times Herald from March 9th, 1945. And it talks about, the article talks about 9 people dying in the plane crash. And the reason that there's a little bit of a discrepancy between how many people died in the plane crash is because there were a couple guys that were flying with the 9-person crew that normally would be on a B-24 that had hitched a ride just for experience, and unfortunately they died too. So there were 11 that were lost in this crash. This is a shot of the mountain that the crash occurred on. It's taken from a few miles away in the approach to the mountain. And basically, I wish I could use my finger and point to it. I should have indicated it on the slide, but this hill, the far left corner, let me see, hold on. Yeah, the far left part of that mountain has kind of a jagged appearance. The crash occurred right below that. And basically, this is about what we know from public overhearing and eyewitness accounts of the bomber flying over. But on February 9th, 1945, at approximately 10 p.m., a B-24 Liberator bomber crashed into a rocky ledge on Pueblo Mountain. As a matter of fact, if they had been 40 feet higher, they would have probably made it out of there. The plane was on a round-robin navigation training mission between Gowan Field near Boise, Idaho, to Hamilton Field in California. Eyewitness accounts, and I say eyewitness, it's more like people heard this more than they saw it, but they recalled hearing a plane fly over Denio from the southwest to the northeast, and for some reason the plane turned around and headed back down to the southwest. And I guess it narrowly missed the summit of the mountain when it passed over it, but it lost so much altitude that it was on a crash course for the side of the mountain, basically. And it crashed in at about a 7,500 foot level. All 11 men on board were killed, and the cause of the crash was never determined. I don't know what happened. It was a clear night, perfect flying conditions. In fact, it was clear enough, and there might have been quite a bit of moonlight at the time too, because like I said, there were eyewitnesses from Denio, which is right on the Oregon-Nevada border, and they could actually see a little bit of the plane as it came over the top. In fact, there was a woman who was interviewed by the Oregon Public Broadcasting about the plane crash, and they did a special on this crash with me on Oregon Field Guide. Unfortunately, they don't have that video left anymore, which is unfortunate. But anyway, there was somebody that actually heard the crash. There was a couple explosions and a flash of light. And so the rescue began the next day. Army Air Corps sent over people from Boise, and they had to go on horseback and mule to the top of the mountain and recover as much of the human remains as they possibly could. And in a catastrophic crash like this with fire, you can imagine how badly injured and beat up the men were that flew on this plane. This is one of my favorite bombers from World War II. I'm pretty much an enthusiastic about any kind of aircraft in World War II. This was called the Liberator. It was the most manufactured of any American bomber, even more than the Flying Fortress B-17. It had kind of an ungainly look, and apparently it was not easy to fly. From people I have read about that talked about flying these things, they called them the flying boxcar. But at any rate, they were used in both the European and the Japanese theaters during World War II, from 1941 to 1945. They were powered by 4 gigantic engines, and you'll see photographs at the crash scene of the engines. They're called Twin Wasp 14-cylinder radial engines. They had a maximum speed of 303 miles an hour at 25,000 feet, and they could carry 8 1,000-pound bombs with a range of 2,300 miles. Now, that's one of the reasons they became so popular in the war, because they had a greater range than the B-17, and they could be used from a lot further away to a target than B-17 could. But both planes were used all throughout the war until the very end when the B-29s came in. At any rate, they had a 110-foot wingspan with a length of 66 feet and a height of 18 feet and weighed about 32,000 pounds empty. That's a lot of aluminum. This is a picture of the crash site. And you can see the top of the mountain where I pointed out the jagged edge on the left side of the mountain. Well, that's just above this place where the plane crashed. And in the foreground is a photograph of one of the Pratt & Whitney engines. There are 4 of them still there. They're all there. They survived. One's partially melted, but the rest are in good shape. Oops, wrong way, sorry. This is a close-up of one of the Twin Wasp engines. And the interesting thing I found when I was there was that during World War II, lighter metal alloys were a hallmark of aviation innovation during that time, because most of the weight, or a lot of weight for an airplane, was the engine. And as you can see by this photograph, the only places you see rust is where they use steel, and everything else is made out of aluminum alloy, and a good portion of the engine is made out of aluminum, making it much lighter than it would be if it was made out of steel. Here's the picture of a backside of one that's was tipped over, and you can see all the non-aluminum on this side, and it's mostly exhaust pipes and some of the inner workings of the gears. And I think they used the steel for the inner working gears, because it's a lot more durable and tough than aluminum. Aluminum is a little more fragile, but for a lot of rest of the engine, it was aluminum. And you see this, and I'm not super mechanical, but I can recognize something that looks like a shock absorber and that has wheel hubs at the other end. That's one of the landing gear off the plane, the main landing gear, and the other one's up there still too. Many of the artifacts at the site, and by artifacts I mean pieces of the plane, still remain at the site. The one thing you don't see much of is all of the aluminum sheeting that went into the body, and that's because the BLM in the 50s bulldozed most of the crash pieces into a little rocky ledge just above where the crash occurred, because they kept getting pilots reporting crashed plane up here, thinking it was a modern crash, and they finally decided to somehow take the airplane's shape and reduce it to a pile, because they got tired of getting calls from pilots saying there was a crash here. But at any rate, you can see they use stainless steel or some sort of chrome plating on the shock absorber assembly in this landing gear, and it's quite big. It's probably 15 feet long, maybe even longer. This is one of the radios found at the site. The one thing we have collected from the site was a few items like this radio. Somebody early on after the crash got all the 50 caliber machine gun cooling portions on the front. So we only have one of those in storage, but several of these artifacts, plus a story of this, were loaned to an aircraft museum in Idaho called the Warhawk Air Museum. And they were really happy to receive some items, because the B-24s were involved in that area during World War II. They flew out of Gowan Field, but the Warhawk had no exhibits and no parts of aircraft to show the public until the BLM made an agreement with them to loan them some of these artifacts. They've been there for probably since 1999, so 21 years. At any rate, we'll move on. Here's a photograph of the ball turret, part of it anyway. And ball turrets were not the favorite place for gunners to be. Normally, the people that got stuck in the ball turret at the bottom of the plane were smaller physically because it was very cramped. And also the bad thing about being in the ball turret is sometimes if planes lost their hydraulics and couldn't lower the landing gear on a crash landing, if they're trying to come in on a belly landing, the ball turret, and if you lost hydraulics, you couldn't get out of the ball turret. So I know a number of people have probably been sacrificed and killed in the ball turret on crash landings. And believe me, there's accounts from bases in California and from Gallen Field where there were quite a number of crashes when people were learning how to fly these things. And when you got trying to train people very quickly to get them into the war, there may not have been enough time spent on trying to get them proficient before they sent them off. And in the process of getting them proficient, many men died. And here's and I don't know if this is true because I'm not a mechanic, but I've had mechanics with me up there at the crash site, and I was told this is a supercharger assembly off one of the engines. And supercharging is something we take for granted these days. Many of the cars we drive are supercharged. But back in the day, I'm sure this was an innovation by the company that made these. Here's a photograph of the team from Hawaii. They basically were able to drive within about a quarter mile of the site, and they had to pack in all their stuff, all their water, these shakers they were using to screen all this material. And they were up there for 2 weeks, digging and recovering human remains and personal effects. And here's the men that died there. There's 11 of them. And there were 2 men on board that were married. And the interesting thing is, since I originally made this slideshow, I was contacted by the granddaughter of Carl McDaniel, and she and her family attended the burial ceremony at Arlington National Cemetery in 2001 when all the human remains excavated by Silhai were interned. I received photos of Carl and the burial center. I got some video of the burial ceremony, and I also found out that the relatives of Anton Pecknick also attended, but I haven't ever made contact with them. But it's interesting that the only 2 people that I've ever actually had any contact or knowledge of that are descendants of these people on this plane are the 2 that were married. Everybody else was single. And they were from all over, but they were really, a lot of them were from Ohio and Wisconsin, Michigan, that area. 1 from Colorado, 1 from New York, or 2 from New York, excuse me. And it's quite interesting site to work on, but a little bit sad too, because these men didn't even get to the war. They died before they were even sent overseas. But they gave their best for the country. There's a picture of PFC Carl McDaniel. He was, what was he on there? He was the rear gunner. There's a bubble on the rear end of the plane that has 50 caliber machine guns that he was manning. Anyway, great picture of Carl, and that was sent to me by his granddaughter. And that's all I have for this particular slideshow. I know I may be a little bit early.
No, Scott, I think your timing is perfect. Thank you so much.
I've never been told that my timing is perfect, ever.
Well, today it is.
Oh, good.
I want to open it back up to questions. And all right, so someone else has asked, is this site called the Silhi crash, CILHI?
That's SILHI is an abbreviation or an acronym for almost said Central Intelligence Agency, Central Identification Lab, Hawaii. HI is Hawaii's abbreviation. And I don't know what this crash is called specifically. It might be the Silhi crash because there haven't been that many times when Silhi came to the continental United States to do recovery of human remains. They're almost always in a foreign country doing this.
Great question and informative answer. Thank you, Scott.
Sure.
I just want to remind everyone again that the Harney County Migratory Bird Festival is made possible by a collaborative effort of all of these federal agencies, nonprofit organizations, local businesses, and community members. It is a lot of work that goes into making this happen every year, and we're really proud to be a part of it. So thank you so much for attending and valuing that. And we hope to see you again next year in person. If not, through the rest of the weekend in these virtual programs. So thank you so much and have a great afternoon. We'll see in the chat box here.
Yeah, there's